Story 1. The date is April 20th, 2017. I finished working at my near minimum wage grocery store job and went about life like normal. I got McDonald's with my husband since it was late, around 11:30 p.m., and I had to work at 9:30 a.m. the next morning. After eating, I stripped down to shower before bed and saw a weird, soft bulge on the right side of my groin. There was no pain, but it was large enough to make me think, what the actual? I knew it wasn't there before, so I contacted a close friend who is a nurse and asked her for her medical opinion. She told me that it might be an inguinal hernia and, although it is rare in women, it could be serious. Hearing those words, I knew I had to go to the local emergency room and get it looked at immediately. I remember asking my husband to take me, but he thought it wasn't a big deal. I had to impress upon him that I had a bad feeling about it and would rather be laughed out of the emergency room than let it go and potentially face a serious health issue. The wait to see a doctor was lengthy. I think I ended up seeing the doctor around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., and they ultimately agreed with me it was possibly a hernia, but they wanted to do an ultrasound to explore the possibility. Unfortunately, the ultrasound department was closed for the night. I was instructed to come back around 7:30 a.m., do the ultrasound, and re-register at the emergency room. During this entire process, I had texted the assistant manager I worked with to say I wasn't coming in for my shift the next day. He said it was fine and not to worry about it, so I went home and slept for a few hours. I called the ultrasound department as instructed, and they were able to schedule me for around 9 a.m. to have it done. During the ultrasound, the technician looked at me with a bit of a scowl and asked, "Where is it?" At some point during the time I slept, the bulge disappeared and was not easily seen from the outside. I pointed out where the bulge had been, wondering if I was imagining the entire thing, and the technician continued with the ultrasound. When I was finished, it didn't take long for me to be called to a room in the emergency room. Another doctor appeared and gave it to me straight. The good news was that it wasn't an inguinal hernia, but the bad news was that the bulge was from numerous abnormally swollen lymph nodes. The doctor assured me it was probably some sort of infection and said, "I wouldn't worry too much. It's probably not cancer." He ordered a CT scan with contrast, and I was there until about 9 p.m. that night. That was the next time I saw the doctor, and when he came in, his face was white as a sheet. He told me that he was going to have to admit me because they were pretty sure that I had cancer. The doctor told me that several other doctors would come and talk to me. After he left, I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. Me? Cancer at 26. That was exactly what I said. I won't bore you with the details, but I will share the resulting diagnosis. Stage 3B diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. It would progress to stage 4 during my treatments, and my medical oncologist emphasized how fortunate I was to have gone to the emergency room when I did. My radiation oncologist's note indicated that the tumor size of the main site to be treated was 25 centimeters long. It extended from the right inguinal region up to the right ureter of my kidney, and there was genuine concern that if I left it too long, I would have gone into kidney failure. Because it was purely by chance that I found it and I had no concrete symptoms indicating cancer, combined with the rapid onset, not 1, not 2, but 5 different doctors said I would have been dead by the age of 27, including my family doctor. I am now 34 years old, menopausal from the treatments, and cured. I tell my story wherever I can to emphasize the importance of seeing a doctor when something doesn't feel right or when you have a bad feeling about something. It is better to be laughed out of the doctor's office than to go home and potentially end up in a serious situation. Story 2. A doctor performed a routine examination on me, but they made a small mistake, causing me to go into cardiac arrest. When I regained consciousness, there were 3 doctors and 5 nurses standing beside me. The positive aspect is that I am no longer afraid to die. I didn't realize it until I woke up again after being revived. Story 3. In 2008, I was working from home. My office was in the basement of our house, and my children, who were 3 and 5 years old at the time, were playing in the playroom, which was also in the basement. I heard a weird hissing sound and got up from my desk to walk to the playroom. I yelled to my 5-year-old, "What was that noise?" He ran past my door, heading up the stairs and screaming, "I don't know." Then something exploded, taking all the pictures off the wall and pushing me backwards. I walked out of my office to see the ceiling caved in and fire behind a door. I searched for my 3-year-old and found her hiding in a corner. I got her out and handed her to her mom before going back downstairs to try to put out the fire. In the back storage room, I saw things on fire on the ground and started trying to extinguish them, thinking it wasn't so bad until I looked up and saw that the entire ceiling above my head was burning. At that point, I ran out of the house. Story 4. At about 5 or 6 years old, I was at my aunt's house for a pool party. My dad was showing me how to swim without floaties and told me not to take them off unless he or another adult was around. I considered that and thought my 13-year-old cousin was adult enough for supervision purposes, so I took off my floaties and went right down to the bottom of a 6-foot pool. No one noticed for about a minute until I had clawed my way up the side of the shallow end and was coughing up a lot of water. I didn't go to the hospital but almost drowned an hour later. That's when we went to the hospital. Story 5. I was enjoying a nice, relaxing smoke session on my back porch late one Friday night. I walked to the edge of the concrete to blow my ash out and got struck on my foot by a massive cottonmouth, also known as a water moccasin. There was instant burning pain. It felt like someone hit me with a flaming baseball bat. It took about 6 hours to receive any antivenom. While it was very unlikely that I could have died, I've never felt impending doom or sheer terror like that in my life. It was a 0 out of 10 experience. I do not recommend it. After a $150,000 hospital bill, I'm all good, with just a bit of tingling nerve damage and a newfound phobia of snakes. Story 6. This is just luck. In 1999, I was in Lebanon when a war broke out. We drove over a bridge and 15 seconds later, it was bombed. I was 9 at the time. I looked behind us in the car and saw a ball of fire. It was pretty crazy. Story 7. I was installing cable television at the top of a pole on an icy street when the ladder slid off the line. I rode the ladder down and rolled as I hit the ground. Fortunately, I only had minor muscle pulls, but it could have ended badly. When I returned to work, I noticed that the force I exerted on the ladder when I hit the ground had mangled 2 rungs. This means I hit with enough force to not only crumple the rung I was on, but also the one underneath it. Those rungs are rated for over 350 pounds, and I only weigh about 220 pounds. Story 8. I was around 5 to 8 years old at the time, and my mom and I were walking from the shopping center to our house, which was about 10 minutes away. The whole time, my mom was holding my arm in a tight grip. As we were crossing the road, I don't even remember how it happened or if I was having a dissociative moment or just zoning out, but I recall coming out of that state as a van sped by just a few inches away. It makes me wonder what could have happened if my mom hadn't pulled me in time or if she hadn't been holding my arm. Story 9. When I went into septic shock at 5 months pregnant, I had extra kidneys that were causing complications. My organs were shutting down, and the operating room was prepared to deliver the baby in case they couldn't save me with her still in utero. Thankfully, the wonderful team of doctors administered enough antibiotics to aid my recovery, and the baby remained healthy. She is now a vibrant 12-year-old, full of attitude and energy. What annoys me most about the entire experience is that when I returned to work, I was criticized because they didn't believe I was ill enough to justify 2 weeks off. I was even asked in front of Human Resources whether I could guarantee I wouldn't be sick again during my pregnancy. Story 10. I had a severe adverse reaction to the measles vaccine when I was 2 years old. Initially, my parents sought help from my aunt, who is a certified medical doctor, although she specializes in homeopathy. After several days of trying homeopathic remedies without improvement, my parents took me to the emergency room. The doctors informed my parents that I was very close to dying, and if I hadn't gone to the hospital, I would have been dead 24 hours later. Even then, I had about a 50% chance of survival. I am glad to say I am still here, alive and well, several decades later. Anti-science is no joke. While I do not remember that exact episode, my parents made the right choice. Needless to say, I completed my vaccination schedule, and my children are fully vaccinated as well. Story 11. I was involved in a car accident while driving a sedan down an icy hill sideways when a large SUV collided with me, exceeding the speed limit. The last thing I remember is the steering wheel bending significantly to the right. Fortunately, I pulled my hands away and screamed just before the impact. If I hadn't, my hand could have been crushed, and my life would likely be quite different, as I work as a programmer. Story 12. I was hit by a car going 85 kilometers per hour while riding a bicycle with my best friend. I flew like Superman for about 120 feet. I suffered a traumatic brain injury and experienced various mental health issues as a result. This experience is definitely not recommended. Story 13. I went in for an appendectomy, and due to the mix of painkillers and anesthesia, I had an overreaction to the medication. The surgeons didn't notice because they became distracted by the fact that my appendix had gone gangrenous and encased itself in a bag of murky fluid. They had to cut a bigger hole in my stomach and move a couple of my organs in order to remove my appendix and clean out the murky fluid. 3 hours after the surgeons had taken me for the 30-minute procedure, the lead surgeon walked up to my mom, who was in the waiting room still covered in my blood, and said, "We can't wake him up." It took them another 2 hours and calling in a large nurse to shake me awake before I came around just to give everyone a dirty look and flip my mom the middle finger before going back to sleep. I was monitored closely for the next couple of days because I technically overdosed. Story 14. My mom worked nights, so my 11-year-old sister and I, who was 7 years old, had to walk to the shops to get groceries after school. We had a fight and separated, and a man pulled his car up next to me and tried to pull me into his car. My sister heard me scream and came running back. The man saw my sister and sped off. We were very lucky. Story 15. I had to talk a man out of harming me. I was staying with my boyfriend's friend. I found myself suddenly homeless at 19. I had some money, but not nearly enough to get a place of my own. My boyfriend trusted this individual who lived with his mother. Since his mother was there, I thought I would be safe. Everything was fine at first. Then, a friend of mine heard about my situation and wanted to move in as well. I tried to say no because I knew he had a thing for her, and I knew she would have to share the guest room with me. Honestly, I just didn't want that. We would literally be sharing a bed. She went around me to ask him if she could move in. I'm not going to blame her for how it all went down in the end, but she added fuel to the fire. She knew this man liked her and wanted her, and she straightforwardly played him. She told him he had a chance, so he would let her in. She refused to pay for anything, like groceries or bills. I had been paying for my own food and gave his mother whatever I could spare. My friend did not contribute. She just kept asking him to buy her unnecessary things like hair dye and a tattoo. I was looking for work and had an interview lined up. She wasn't even trying. Finally, the situation exploded one night. He was fed up with her leading him on. He got hyped on cocaine and something else, took out his shotgun, and shoved it in my face in the kitchen. He was screaming at me about how he was being used by her and led on. He was speaking as though he thought I could make her be with him. I had to gently and carefully talk him down by telling him we would both leave. So I was once again suddenly homeless with nowhere to go. Once we were gone, he absolutely destroyed everything we hadn't been able to take with us, including my bicycle. I have no idea how he twisted it the way he did, but when I got it back, it was unusable. Story 16. In January 2024, I had pneumonia. The doctor prescribed medications, but nothing worked. For 1 month, I was literally in a coma. Story 17. Traveling back to college one summer with my stepsister in the passenger seat of my 1988 Cherokee at Texas Tech. Driving down Highway 82 late at night, with no highway divider, I started to get bored. I had a bit of Xanax on me, took a blue pill, and became sleepy while my stepsister was already asleep. I woke up as a semi-truck took off my passenger side mirror while I crossed over the lane directly in front of it. It was close enough to break the mirror, and I will never forget the sound of the horn, the mirror snapping, my stepsister screaming, and how the Jeep rocked from the wind. She slapped me. I almost killed us by being reckless. Story 18. Flew for the Navy. There were 7 fire emergencies on the plane when the aging, poorly maintained electronic equipment caught fire during my first tour. My crew recovered from a spin at less than 100 feet. The Navy couldn't understand why I didn't want to fly for them anymore after that. Story 19. Walking to school at around 8 years old, I looked both ways before crossing the street, with no cars in sight. Just as I was about to take a step, a car suddenly flew by me on my right. It felt as though something had stopped me from moving forward. I remember I couldn't stop crying but was still forced to go to school. I'm sure a guardian angel was with me that day. I know I will die one day, but God must have thought it was too soon for me to go. Story 20. I was once nearly run over by a famous European football player who lived in my neighborhood with a car that probably costs more than my entire life. Story 21. My friend and I climbed a massive sandstone bluff off Interstate 90 in Wisconsin years ago. We went right up the steep face. The last part was a jump to grab the base of a tree and pull myself up, with my feet off the small, shallow ledge below. I missed the base of the tree and dug my fingers into the loose pine and dirt, which immediately gave way to the sandstone below. I felt my shin hit the ledge beneath and knew it was over. My friend turned, grabbed my forearm, and pulled me up before I could even gasp. I was 14 and he took his own life a short time later. I never got to tell him that he saved me, and I only wish I could have done the same for him when he needed it. Rest in peace, little brother. Story 22. According to my mom, I was almost aborted several times shortly after she found out she was pregnant because she believed I would be a burden if she had me. She claims that my dad's threat to leave her if she went through with it was the only reason I survived. Story 23. I fell off my horse, and my foot twisted in the stirrup, causing me to be dragged around the ring for a good 5 minutes. The horse panicked and raced back and forth, even running me through a few jumps and standards, which are the large structures on the sides of fences that hold the bars. His hooves were flying around my head, and while the helmet offered some protection, I truly thought I was going to die. It is every rider's worst nightmare. The showgrounds crew was absolutely excellent and handled the situation perfectly. Once they got him under control, disentangled me, and I stood up, we discovered I was completely uninjured. I had no broken bones and not even a scratch. However, I was very sore the next day, with bruises all over and strained muscles and tendons, but no significant injury. Story 24. I almost fell off a cliff while skiing. I used to ski all the time when I was growing up. I was pretty good too. I didn't do jumps or anything, but I could ski double black diamonds. We went skiing one time when the trails were very icy. I was only on an intermediate trail when this happened. I misjudged something, whether it was how icy it actually was or the angle of my skis. I'm not sure. The beginning of the trail was very narrow, and the ice made it tricky. I was trying to make quick turns to control my speed. Unfortunately, my quick turns weren't quick enough, and I veered left toward a very high drop-off. The trail was narrow, and there were no gates or anything to prevent falling off the mountain. It all happened so fast. 1 minute I was gliding, and the next minute I was hanging onto the root of a tree, dangling from the cliff. Luckily, 2 kind men came down the trail a few minutes later and saw me hanging there. They each grabbed an arm and gently lifted me back up. I had lost my skis, so I had to slide down the trail on my backside because it was so slippery. I was young when this happened, maybe 10 or 11. I still vividly remember the faces of those men who saved me. Story 25. When my ex loaded a bullet into the gun, spun the chamber, placed it to my head, and pulled the trigger. Not once, but twice. It is something I will never forget. Story 26. When I was a kid, my friend and I got caught in a riptide at the beach. We were pulled away from the area where our families were. They realized what was happening but had to stay on shore because there was nothing else they could do. Lifeguards are scarce at the beach we visit. Somehow, after what felt like a marathon of swimming, we made it back. My face was burning from the salt water, and my legs felt weak. I pay attention to riptide alerts now. I forgot to mention the really amazing part. My friend and I managed to stick together the whole time. Story 27. A man tried to pick me up at a bar. He was very unappealing. He was arrested a few months later for killing 6 men he met at bars. Story 28. Not me, but my wife. It was a normal day. I picked the kids up from school, and then received word that our older daughter had been in an accident. She was fine, but while my wife was sitting in traffic, she suffered a hypertensive hemorrhagic stroke. This type of stroke has a high mortality rate. Fortunately, she was at the scene of an accident, where paramedics were already present. It just so happened that one of the paramedics was a good friend of ours and had gone back to check on her. Without that remarkable stroke of luck, she would have been dead for almost 20 years. Story 29. I was walking my dog in a field at a campground where I was staying. I heard a bullet was very close but didn't see anything. Later, after talking to a few people, I realized that the sound I heard meant it had passed right by my head. Story 30. When I was 10 years old, I was invited to a friend's birthday party. Her family had rented a house with a large pool, but I didn't want to get in the water because I didn't know how to swim. Her uncle, seeing that I was the only child not having fun, came to ask me about it. I told him I couldn't swim, but he thought it was just an excuse and that I was actually shy. He picked me up and threw me into the pool. I tried to scream and ended up drowning. I remember reaching for the edge of the pool, but I lost consciousness before I could grab it. Fortunately, his brother saved me. To this day, I'm afraid to get into a pool, but I'm not afraid of death. Story 31. Twice. First, I was 6 at a friend's house, and her brother had chopped a hole in the ice to fish. It snowed for a couple of days and covered the hole. My friend went into the house and I was playing with their dog and followed later. I walked right over the snow-covered hole, went under the ice, and did not come back up. Instead, I hit solid ice. I don't remember much, but somehow I flailed enough that eventually my hand found the edge of the hole. I managed to pull myself up through the hole and rolled until the ice was thick enough to stand. I made it back to the house, which was about half a mile from the pond. My clothes and boots were heavy and starting to freeze. I banged on the front door, unable to speak. I will never forget the look on my friend's mother's face. Pure panic and fear. She stripped me completely naked in seconds and ran a warm bath. Then she had to call my parents. I can't imagine how that went. Poor lady had lost a son to drowning years prior, and she was hysterical. I was oddly calm. I didn't speak much as a child anyway. I was never afraid to die. I know that. Second, I fell asleep at the wheel at 16. Hitting a tree head-on at 60 miles per hour. I destroyed my body, mangled my arm in the steering wheel, and had internal bleeding. I spent 8 days in the intensive care unit and had to be cut out of my car, which was beyond recognition. Remarkably, I did not die. I spent a year in a cast and had reconstructive surgery to piece my arm back together. Story 32. My family had a bakery. After a deep clean, I went to put the oven back in place and plug it in. I had to lean over a metal table to reach the outlet while my mom was talking to me, so I wasn't paying attention. My fingers must have been touching the metal prongs because all 240 volts hit me hard. Unfortunately, since my other hand was on the metal table, all that electricity traveled across my chest and through my heart and lungs instead of down to my feet. Initially, I felt okay, but then my heartbeat became irregular, and I was taken to the hospital quickly. Afterwards, the emergency room doctor told me he didn't really know what my recovery would look like because it should have killed me. Story 33. I was severely physically assaulted and left for dead on a concrete floor with paper as a blanket. I think I did die because I remember hearing him say something like, "I'm not sure if she's breathing. Some people do not deserve uniforms." Story 34. I overdosed on medication and had several seizures. In the hospital, they pumped my stomach, and I survived. Story 35. I was hit by a Jeep traveling at least 50 miles per hour in a 35 miles per hour zone. The car flipped and rolled about 3 times before landing upright. Thankfully, we survived only because of the seat belt and a lot of luck. The car we were in, a 2020 Volkswagen Tiguan, had a crash feature that limited the roof from caving in more than 2 inches. If it weren't for that, we would have been crushed. It has been 2 years already. It feels like it was just yesterday. To sum it up, look both ways, even if you have the right of way. Story 36. Years ago, I was taking a bicycle ride around my town. I was near a reservoir when it started to rain. I waited for the rain to pass under a large tree. It became very windy, and then a booming voice inside me urged, "Move to the right." I did, and narrowly avoided being crushed by a huge branch. Story 37. I was driving to my grandparents' house for Christmas during my first year of college. While I lived in Pennsylvania for a few years before that, I was unprepared for how bad the roads were in a Utah winter. I was about 30 minutes from their house when the snow became really bad. I could see maybe 5 feet in front of me, and I was driving my little 1999 Nissan Altima. I was going about 30 miles per hour, which I definitely should have slowed down, but everyone else was going at that speed, so I thought I was okay at the time. I hit a patch of black ice and lost control. I hit the semi-truck to my right twice, once on my passenger headlight and a second time on the passenger taillight before I spun toward the center barrier. Thankfully, I was just off the road enough and didn't hit anyone else. I was also very grateful because a man stopped in front of me. My car was facing oncoming traffic, and let me sit in his car while I panicked and called my grandparents. Interestingly, this man and my dad shared the same name. It's not every day that a small car hits a semi-truck and the driver survives. It's probably rare for the car to still be running after such an accident. That car lasted me another 8 months before it finally gave out. Story 38. I was walking home alone at night when a man started following me. I ducked into a shop, pretending to browse, but he waited outside. The shopkeeper noticed, called me a cab, and walked me to it. I found out later that the same man assaulted someone else in the area that week. Story 39. I have multiple stories of nearly dying, but the best is probably when my friend's ex-boyfriend strangled me, trying to get her location from me. He looked very angry as I lost consciousness. Another friend arrived and helped get him off me. Story 40. One day, I was driving home from work when I spaced out and felt a tingling sensation in my hands. I assumed I was exhausted and had consumed too much caffeine. As soon as I pulled into my driveway, I experienced a rush of adrenaline and felt a sense of impending doom. I got out of my car and woke up on the ground surrounded by paramedics. I had a seizure. If anything had delayed me for even 2 minutes that day, I could have harmed someone or myself. Story 41. I had croup at age 4. My throat swelled so much that I suffocated. I was resuscitated with a tracheostomy, and 50 years later, I still have a noticeable scar. I had a profound near-death experience, which I will not elaborate on here, but the result is that I do not fear death. I'm not rushing toward it, but I do not fear it. Story 42. A few months ago, I had a severe stroke and had to be airlifted to a hospital. They asked my husband what steps he wanted taken to try to save me. I have no memory of the next month and stayed at a rehabilitation center for an additional month. Now, I have no obvious functional deficits. I remember everyone and everything except during that month, and I'm slowly working on getting back to my life. Story 43. I was being monitored for an ectopic pregnancy for which I had been given methotrexate. One night, I felt a sudden intense pain on the side of the ectopic and knew I was in trouble. My husband rushed me to the emergency room. At the emergency room, the radiologist said there was no evidence of a rupture. The emergency room doctor couldn't reach the obstetrician-gynecologist on call, so he nearly sent me home. But just before I was about to be discharged, the obstetrician-gynecologist called him back and said, "Don't send her home. I'm on my way." She hurried down, and upon entering the room, had forms ready for me to sign for emergency surgery. I was taken into surgery within minutes. Upon waking up a few hours later, I was informed that I did the right thing by going to the emergency room when I did. When the obstetrician-gynecologist opened me up, my tube was in the process of rupturing. Had I been sent home, I probably would have bled out and died in my sleep. Story 44. I was crossing the road. It was curved, and you couldn't see beyond the curve. People usually slowed down their cars near it. There were no traffic lights of any kind in that small town. Anyway, I was crossing when a car came so fast I could hear it approaching and did not slow down. I was halfway through the crossing. By the time my brain registered the noise of the car, it was there, and it hit me. I went flying and landed hard on the other side of the road. I remember putting my arms around my head to protect it and then blacking out. To me, it felt like ages, but it was only 2 seconds. I was left with permanent damage to one knee, several scratches and bruises, unable to walk or sit for several days, but thankfully no broken ribs. Those 2 seconds were my moment of, I could have died. And the driver did not stop to check on me. Story 45. Carbon monoxide leak in my first apartment caused me to have a severe headache for days. I initially thought it was just stress from my new job. My cat began acting very strangely and wouldn't stop meowing at me to get up. Story 46. I got my license 2 weeks ago, and I'm a learner driver. I was driving home from school when I approached a railroad crossing in front of our house. I didn't notice the red light, and as I crossed the tracks, a train was coming at me just 10 meters away. I missed it by half a meter. I reached my house paralyzed with fear. My dad angrily ran out of the house, not believing what had happened. I sat in the car for 20 minutes, blaming myself for missing the warning. I still have the sight of the train in my head. I'm in shock and don't know how to cope with this near-death experience. I feel extremely ashamed of myself. Story 47. My mom and I were crossing the street in Orlando, Florida, when two cars raced through the red light and almost hit us. The first car sped by and we jumped back, standing there for a moment in shock. Then my mom grabbed my arm and pulled me back just as the second car went through. The walk sign was on. A police car was parked at the side of the road with an officer inside, but he didn't react. I asked my mom if we should talk to him, and she said, "Why? He clearly doesn't care." So we didn't. Still, a few people came up and asked if we were all right. Story 48. I was on a mountain bike ride when I came across a man with a flat tire. I slowed down and asked if he needed assistance. He said he was fine and thanked me for asking. Less than a mile later, I reached an intersection and watched an accident send a car airborne right through the crosswalk, where I would have been waiting to cross the street. If that man had not been there with a flat tire, I could have been killed. Story 49. Multiple things, including riptides, hypothermia, blood poisoning, and pulmonary embolism after COVID-19 at age 52, changed my perspective on life. Story 50. Walking around St. Paul, Minnesota with some friends, we were smoking a blunt. I tried crossing the road without looking, and one of my friends grabbed my shoulder and pulled me back onto the sidewalk just as an 18-wheeler zoomed past me, nearly taking me out. I looked at them in a panic, gave them the rest of the blunt, and thanked them. Story 51. I got bucked and dragged in the stirrup, resulting in a broken rib. Could have ended like Christopher Reeve's situation, but I would not have been a beloved actor. Others have faced similar experiences, but this one comes to mind. Story 52. I worked at a milk processing plant years ago and was cleaning a silo that had buttermilk in it. I had to climb a ladder on the side, open the hatch, and spray the remaining buttermilk before setting it up for mechanical washing. To make buttermilk, you have to add live cultures like yogurt. I stuck my head in just a little to reach with the hose, which is a significant safety violation. I was instantly overwhelmed, got dizzy, and the surroundings closed in while I was holding the ladder with one hand about 20 feet up. Story 53. I didn't have a bowel movement for 4 consecutive weeks when I was about 3 years old. Fortunately, I don't remember anything, and I didn't realize how alarming that was until later. It's not a super exciting story, but I'm still unsure how I managed to cope. Story 54. I had a long-term stalker finally make his move, and I decided to play along to get him caught. Could have ended badly, but luckily, I got the last laugh. I would never recommend dealing with a stalker alone to anyone else. Story 55. My friends and I went hiking one day and got lost in the middle of the jungle. We reached the same point where we started after 2 rounds of trying to find our way out. Felt like a scene from a movie. The only way out was to reach the top of the mountain, where there was a village and the villagers knew the route to the city. So we climbed the hill without any safety equipment. If our legs had slipped, we could have fallen off the hill and never been found again. A friend of mine even slipped, but we caught him. If we hadn't caught him, he could have died there. We climbed successfully, and the villagers showed us the route. Story 56. I was 12 years old and flying alone to visit my mom. There was a delay, and I ended up taking a different flight. When we landed at the airport, we arrived at Terminal 1 instead of Terminal 2, where my mom was waiting. I looked lost and told a random man next to me what had happened. He looked at me and said, "Oh, I can take you to Terminal 2. Just get in my van." Being a clueless and jet-lagged 12-year-old, I said yes. Thankfully, he dropped me off and nothing happened. However, when my mom found out what occurred, she almost passed out. Story 57. When I was 13, I contracted H1N1. I recovered only to start feeling sick again. One doctor thought it was H1N1 returning, but my primary doctor examined me and told my mom to take me straight to the hospital. That night, I was diagnosed with bacterial meningitis. It was the most painful night of my life, and thankfully, the morphine helped me forget most of the pain. Here is the part my parents didn't tell me until recently. That night, the doctors informed my parents that they had medication for one of the strains, and if the spinal tap showed a different strain, I could die that night. Fortunately, the strain was the exact one for which they had the medication. Later that night, I was supposed to be transported from Anne Arundel Medical Center in Annapolis to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore by helicopter. However, due to bad weather, I was taken by ambulance to the Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C. There was a medic with the ambulance team who reassured my parents not to worry and that I was going to be fine. After I got better, they returned to find and thank that medic, but they were informed that there was no medic fitting that description who was part of the team that transported me. I spent a week in the hospital. They inserted a tube in my arm to deliver medicine to my heart. I was awake for that, and it was fascinating to watch. I also got to see an X-ray of my chest, which was cool. I always knew I was close to death that first night, but I never realized until recently how close I actually was. I am 29 now, and this is something I will never forget. One other thing, that first night when I was close to death was October 31st, Halloween. Story 58. My whole life has been like a Final Destination movie ever since I almost fell into a river where a powerful waterfall was crashing down. I'm not referring to the cute trickling type, but to one that pours out of a large opening in the rocks. Story 59. When I was a little kid, my mom took her eyes off me for a few seconds, and I immediately sped towards the road on my little tricycle, right in front of a semi-truck. I was told the driver didn't see me, but my mom, reacting quickly to my sudden movement, ran onto the road waving at the driver. He slammed on the brakes to avoid her and stopped just 20 centimeters away from hitting me. Story 60. I was on a dirt bike with my neighbor, who was drunk without my knowledge. He did a wheelie, and my head bounced off the road. Someone almost hit us and called the police. I had to be airlifted to a major hospital. I suffered 8 brain bleeds and was a John Doe. My sister kept calling hospitals and finally located me. I kept spiking high fevers, but the medical staff couldn't do anything until I was identified. Eventually, my mother instructed them to shave my head, as I had very long hair. I had a gaping head wound that became infected. I was placed in a medicated coma. The hospital I was airlifted to was out of state, and if it hadn't been for my sister's effort in calling around, I might have died because I was a John Doe. Story 61. I was a young pilot on my way to the training area in a small Cessna by myself to do the usual fun activities. All of a sudden, I experienced a 90% engine failure. The engine was still running, but I couldn't maintain altitude. In training for a forced landing, you set up your descent rate to avoid a wing stall. Next, I called the control tower to declare my emergency situation and location. I then turned off all power and unlatched the door to assist with escape after the crash. I had to choose a forced landing spot, preferably into the wind and away from people and structures. The challenge was that there were power lines and farm fences along with a lot of deep snow. No matter where I picked, my gear was likely to catch and flip the plane. The only thought running through my mind while trying to choose a landing spot was a small aircraft crash I witnessed 5 years earlier. I watched helplessly as 2 pilots burned before me. I'll never forget the sight and the smell. Back to the story. I finally picked a field to possibly land in. My glide descent was perfect, and I thought I found a spot to maneuver through the power lines. I had under a minute before my potential demise. Suddenly, the engine coughed and picked up RPM. I closed the doors, turned on the heat and radios, and called the control tower. They gave me priority for any runway, and I was just above treetop level with no way to climb. Emergency vehicles and fire trucks chased me down the runway during the most perfectly smooth landing you could imagine. It turns out the issue was a maintenance problem with lead fouling in the magnetos. I have reflected on everything that happened that day, and I'm still convinced that was it for me. Story 62. I was at the beach with my husband about 5 years ago during the cold months. The section we were at had large waves and ultra-soft sand. I turned away from the ocean, took a step, and suddenly a wave hit me, knocking me down. I couldn't regain my footing and began to be pulled out. He ran up quickly and was able to pull me out of the water. I lost a shoe and was pretty sure that if he hadn't reached me, I would have drowned. The ocean is no joke. Story 63. I ended up jumping a Toyota RAV4 about 40 feet over a small creek. When it landed, it rolled a few times. I was not wearing my seatbelt and was ejected from the passenger side window, breaking my back in 4 places. I am doing absolutely fine now and always wear a seatbelt. Story 64. I died from sudden infant death syndrome and was resuscitated shortly after. My mother fell down a flight of stairs while holding me as an infant and luckily only sustained a cut. She was okay as well. I had Kawasaki disease as a toddler, which nearly took me out entirely as I was deteriorating very fast, and none of the doctors could make a diagnosis. I was born with a major heart murmur that causes palpitations, which has stopped my heart on a few occasions. I was molested when I was 5 by a family friend at a family Christmas party. I was then assaulted and told awful things that I cannot bring myself to repeat. Emotionally, I died that day. He has since passed away. I have had 5 concussions, 2 of which were major, the last one occurring when I was thrown against a wall by a family member at age 14. I almost drowned at our local pool when my brother, who could not swim, was standing on my shoulders. As I held my breath and walked him from the deep end to the poolside, another kid jumped on top of me, causing me to be concussed by his heel into my temple. My mother experienced multiple abusive relationships, one of which escalated into me being forced to watch as he beat her on the couch, nearly knocking her out cold, and then left to get alcohol. When she regained consciousness, she grabbed my 2 siblings, aged 4 months and 6 months, and we rushed through the hallways trying to find a way out. He returned for something and saw us. He rushed at us, screaming, and in that moment, I confronted him. I don't know why, but I just didn't want him to hurt my mother or my brothers. At just 6 years old, he grabbed me and took me back to the apartment while my mom escaped down the hall to the outside. I was behind everyone, and in the rush, she was unaware I had done that. He beat me mercilessly, calling me ungrateful and a burden on his life. I can't remember much of it after that. I just know she managed to get away from him and found me in the apartment. She took all 3 of us to a convenience store down the street to hide in the bathroom, which he did find, but the employees feigned ignorance and called the police, prompting him to yell and leave. Our grandfather picked us up, and I didn't see my mom again for another week or so. This event cemented my emotional damage, and I have had a fear of men since then, which puts me in a difficult place as an adult. I was beaten often as a child from ages 6 to 16 by a family member, usually resulting in some form of physical or emotional trauma. I made a failed suicide attempt after a difficult breakup, which caused fuzzy vision in my left eye and resulted in a week in the hospital. I have been suffering from random seizures misdiagnosed as panic attacks for the last 4 years, and only after a recent emergency room visit was this discovered. But I am still here. Story 65. I had 12 seizures in 3 days, a week before my 23rd birthday. I have experienced hundreds of seizures and fractured my back, and that was easily the most painful experience, both mentally and physically, I have ever felt. Imagine the intensity of a migraine multiplied by 10, affecting your entire upper body. I genuinely wanted to die. Then they loaded me with painkillers and I felt fine, but that whole weekend was awful. Story 66. I had a cyst on my ovary that exploded, sending infected fluid into my body cavity. I spent 7 days in the hospital on strong antibiotics. Story 67. Acute severe pancreatitis developed sepsis and fluid in the lungs. My wife was told to prepare for the worst. I was very fortunate. Story 68. One experience I had while volunteering in the Congo involved getting into a taxi by myself. In that area, taxis are often shared, and you can stop a driver who may already have several passengers. I got into a taxi with only men on board, 2 in the front and 3 in the back. I sat in the front next to the door. I noticed the men began to touch my hair and speak in French among themselves. Although I know some French, my proficiency is not perfect, especially with the local accent. The journey itself was long, and it felt even longer because I was anxious they might take a detour without me realizing it and leave me stranded. I had heard several stories about such situations, and since I didn't know the language very well or the exact route, I worried that if they changed directions, I wouldn't notice. I was also aware that there is generally little respect for women in that environment. Fortunately, I was able to get off a little early while we were still in the city, and nothing happened to me. Story 69. I was assaulted for 3 hours, among other things. They slammed my head against walls, jumped on me, and hit my face. I experienced seizures in the hospital. They caused enough damage that it took me nearly a decade to learn to read and write at a 10th grade level again. I still have trouble sometimes. Story 70. I coughed up blood and drove myself to the emergency room. A couple of hours later, I underwent major heart surgery. If I had just gone to bed that night, I wouldn't have woken up the next morning. Story 71. I was kicked down a flight of stairs as a kid, and I still remember the pressure of my hands holding my head to protect it. My head was throbbing, and everything went blurry after I reached the floor. Another time, a group of older boys threw a lit firework at me, and thankfully, only my mental health was injured, as I intercepted it and ran for safety. Story 72. I was skateboarding in Times Square behind a truck and tried to go around it without considering the oncoming traffic. I nearly got hit by another truck coming from the opposite direction. Story 73. I aspirated on amniotic fluid and was drowning at birth before they performed an emergency cesarean section. I believe I was technically deceased for a brief period. Story 74. As a kid, I accidentally inhaled the toothpaste on my brush. This started a minute-long struggle to breathe because it closed my windpipe. After what felt like ages, I could finally breathe again. I was exhausted by the end of the day. Story 75. Mine is not as dramatic as some here, but it is forever seared in my mind. I was a young kid, about 13 at the time, intent on buying firecrackers at a small downtown store. When I say downtown, I mean down a giant hill. Starting near the top on my banana seat Mustang bicycle, I was going all out. I was quite sure I was well past 30 miles per hour. Up ahead was the last crossroad before my destination when a car slowly turned across my path. I hit the brakes and slid on the pavement for at least 50 feet, grinding through my pants as I slid. The car panicked and stopped moving through its turn. I reached the car while still sliding and went under the front bumper, hitting my head hard. My head ricocheted onto the pavement, and I blacked out for about 5 seconds. The bike was mostly destroyed, but I got up, all bruised and disoriented. I pulled my bike from underneath the car and got off the road. The driver was unsure what to do, so I foolishly said I was okay and proceeded to walk home with the mangled bike. To the driver's credit, he kept showing up during my walk home to check on me. Fast forward a few years, and pretty much the same thing happened again. This time, I was probably going too fast on a 10-speed bicycle when a van turned in front of me. My whole body hit its side and caved it in pretty well. The driver's insurance paid for a new 10-speed. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.